Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Friday Night AV. It is December 15th. This is episode 10. Thanks for joining us. Kat and I were not on this Wednesday, but we will be on next Wednesday because we have reached and exceeded 1,000 subscribers. I believe that we have gotten back to everybody that entered that contest. That contest now is currently closed. So next Wednesday, we will come on and do our giveaway. Thanks to our amazing subscribers, supporters, our Patreon members. You guys making it happen. You guys absolutely rock. Exciting month for us. Next Friday night is the holiday special for this channel where we'll have myself, Michael Stevens, Youth Man, will be on. Tony from JTR, and also Mark Giovanetti will also be on. And I'm pretty certain that I can say now that I believe that Nick will be joining us. I'm not going to be good at pronouncing his last name, but he was at M-Wave. A lot of people know him. He was doing the TV and projector calibrations for M-Wave. So it'll be cool. We're going to have 5 people on for the holiday special. And we were starting at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time next Friday instead of 9 p.m. because that might end up being a little bit longer of an episode. So just like to thank everybody for joining us. Thanks to my sponsors, South Shore Plumbing in Chicago, 7256 South Exchange. For any plumbing or heating supply parts, definitely hit up those guys. Lance and John running the shop over there. Able Sewer Company, any sewer plumbing needs that you have in Chicagoland, hit us up. And special thanks to Michael Stevens, Youth Man. You guys are able to see me because he donated a camera when we first started the channel. He's a big reason I started the channel. And Kat, say hello.
Hi.
Catherine joined us on the other computer, thumbing through the comments tonight. Like always, she gives us a big hand. And certainly I've been looking forward to this evening's episode. I've been able to meet a lot of cool people in the industry, other enthusiasts, and travel and check out some cool stuff. Now that I'm doing the podcast, I'm actually being able to get some really knowledgeable people on here, whether it be an enthusiast or an expert. And if you guys watch Youthman's release today, he actually did a room tour of one of the special guests this evening, Matthew Poes from Poes Acoustics. Did I say that right?
You did say it right.
Acoustics.
Yay!
She gave me so much shit. I keep saying acoustics, like I sell pool cues or something. So Acoustics. So Matthew Poes from Poes Acoustics. Acoustics. See, there I go again. Joining us this evening. He's very well known in Audioholics space and also room design, acoustic design, and also Dunn from Haven Smart, also from Audioholics. So thanks for joining us this evening. We're going to be talking about a bunch of things. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, we'll certainly try to get to as many of those as well as we go on and try to tell a story. So without further ado, I've been excited about this evening. So got to put my thinking cap on because these boys are smart. We'll bring on, first of all, Dunn, do a little dance for everybody. Oh. That's for your OnlyFans.
Hey, how come I didn't get invited to that Christmas audio gangbang extravaganza podcast?
See, I told you we're getting deleted tonight. Yeah. And we'll bring Matthew on.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks. So well.
You're not getting any of that from me, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks. First of all, I gotta say, man, as I watched the episode today, Youth Man put out that new room you built, absolutely unbelievable.
Thank you.
I know that was your design, and you did all that, and it really threw me. And I'm glad that I watched that because I was really confused on why you had a hard floor, and when you explained how those speakers worked. That really made a lot of sense to me. So no, man, awesome. We're going on a road trip where we're going to be going out to South Carolina and down to Florida to visit Don and visit Youth Man. So in March, if you're available, man, we'd love to stop by and check out that space.
Just give me a heads up and we'll try to make it work out.
So I've had Don on before. Don's always a good time. This is my first time having Matthew on. For the people that don't know, who exactly is Matthew Poes?
Who is Matthew Poes?
Yeah, who is Matthew Poes?
Matthew Poes, I think, wears a lot of hats, so I'll try to go through what I do. But starting maybe 5 years ago, I started writing professionally as a journalist in the AV world for AV Nirvana. Had been actually doing contract work for some manufacturers, doing testing and everything. So for a lot of reasons I've mentioned before, have a good knowledge base for audio and acoustics. For those who are curious where that started, beyond the typical passion that we all have and studying up on it through that, when I was in graduate school, I did take courses in acoustical physics. I didn't go to school actually for this. I went to school for basically psychology, human development. But hit a point where I'd taken all the courses I could for my degree, had to finish my dissertation, and had to take courses, though, to maintain a correct caseload. And so of the things I could take, one of them was a bunch of basically PhD level acoustical physics courses. So I did that for a while. Then got out of school, worked in what I actually went to school for. And then this was just a hobby, and then kind of turned into something I could make money at too. So I was writing, was doing some design work. That this big project we often talk about with Dunn was really the biggest. It's still probably one of the biggest projects I've ever done. I would say when that happened, I moved to a point where I could quit the job I had and go full time working as a home theater and acoustic designer. Where since then, I work with Anthony Grimani at PMI. We collaborate and do projects together. I maintain my own company, Poes Acoustics, but contract to him to do the way I'll use his words because it's hard to put a number on it, but probably 80% or more of the engineering at PMI is done by me now on systems. I design and engineer systems for people, where those systems cost anywhere from $500,000 on up, I would say.
Matt, you might want to throw out that Anthony pretty much wins best theater in the world.
Yeah, he's won every year for like the last bazillion years.
He's the man.
Yep. And he won this past year, and I'm sure we'll continue to win. And those future winning designs will be designs that I've engineered. We've got cool projects at this point all over the world. And, even though I'm sitting here telling you, like, I do these big expensive projects, I still work with your average normal home theater enthusiast too, and help and support them. And just because I work on the big one doesn't mean I can't help improve everybody's theater at any price level. And so I do a lot of consulting through Poes Acoustics. I sell acoustic treatments for people for their rooms, as well as the designs. I am a dealer for a lot of products as well, like Trinov and Storm. I am a calibrator and can install Trinovs especially, which I know really, really well. And a big fan of ProListen. I have those in my own system. I sell ProListen. I've been very supportive of the company. And so I think you'll see that as well. I write for Audioholics now, and have written a little bit for Sound and Vision. You'll probably see me do more articles for Sound and Vision and maybe Stereophile in the future as well, which is, as much as I love Gene and I love Audioholics and will continue to do that because I'm a very loyal person when it comes to that kind of stuff. I grew up reading Stereophile and grew up reading Sound and Vision. And so it's always been a dream to be a part of that.
Yeah, I grew up reading Stereo Review and Sound and Vision and stuff too.
Yeah.
So that'll be awesome. So so you and Don have a connection. How did you guys get together? I mean, what is the connection between? Because I've always admired your work, but Don was actually had the idea. He's like, "Oh, you should have Matthew on." I was like, "Dude, I don't know Matt like that. I don't think that's possible." So, I mean, Don is really responsible for bringing us together. What's the connection that you and Don have?
We like each other. And
We're really good friends. We're polar opposites in a lot of ways, but also
opposites attract.
No, I mean, I've been doing this for well over 30 years and done home theaters since really home theaters were a thing. And in my entire career, and I've worked with some of the best in the business, some of the most creative, best professionals. When I met Matt, I knew I found somebody special. And I mean that with due respect. He is absolutely, and he's going to hate when I say it. He's a PhD, and Matt's not just smart in this. You can have a conversation with Matt about anything, whether it be the geopolitical ramifications of the Peloponnesian War or acoustics or whatever, child rearing. I mean, the guy's just super knowledgeable and one of the nicest, most humble, best human beings I've ever met in my life. And I love him. I give him a kidney. I don't know if he'd want it, but I'd give him one.
I mean, I know where it's been, so I appreciate it.
That's good point. It's like the rug when the lady's hitting it, getting the dirt off. but Matt's just, I mean, he's an awesome dude, man. Just, you know, and we talk about life, we talk about kids, we talk about, you know, all the things that friends do. He's got a beautiful wife and 2 great kids that I adore. And this theater he built in his house, he had the opportunity to fully express all of his disciplines that he knows in creating this space for his own theater, which he's using now to do demos and demonstrate to clients and whatnot. But it's a magical experience when it's done correctly, like it is there. And I mean correctly, from the floor to the walls, to the ceiling, to the window, to the walls, to the door. How much is your doorway? Like 600 pounds?
Yeah, I mean, I think the slab itself is like 450, 500 pounds.
Yeah,
the whole thing framed in was like
on the
600
second
pounds.
floor. Yeah, it's a
Beautiful
beautiful room.
getting it up the stairs.
The video and pictures don't do it justice. When you're in there, even the screen's in the right place. It's an amazing experience, and that's why I pushed him, I think, a little bit to go out and do, and now he's leaps and bounds. I mean, reading about him, he's involved with Cedia. I should get a cut, man. I'm like, you know, like your manager.
you definitely played a big role in the
your
change.
promotional part. No, he's.
It hit a point where like literally when I think it was about a month ago, I got an email from my some people I used to work with in my old job saying I was being honored for something I had done there, and they were like, we need, you know, we're publishing this and we're going to be honoring all the people that supported this. You were one of the main people behind this effort. You know, what's your affiliation right now? And I was like, Poes Acoustics, has nothing to do with children. they were a little confused, but like the point was, like, I was at one point in 2 worlds. I was actually doing really well in that job and doing well here too, but I'd lost my passion for that. Love this. And Don was just saying, you know, you're at a point you can do it. For me, it was a big risk because one was a steady paycheck with benefits. The other was me just going out on my own and seeing what I can do. But so far it's been good.
So if somebody wants to reach out to you, Matt, they can just reach out and say, hey, I have a 14 by 20 foot room. That's a bare room. What's the best we can do with it? And then your services be like, this is what you should do in that room, basically. And then you can walk somebody through that.
Yeah, I mean, you can go to my website and see there is some pricing there. The pricing reflects the lower end of my services because a lot of it does say, you know, TBD type stuff.
Yeah.
Any really intensive services that like we provide for high-end rooms, you can't price those very easily. I mean, I do actually have a price sheet that we use with PMI that my prices for that work and PMIs are the same because it's really the same people. It's a lot, like I can give people those prices, but the reality is I need to kind of know what you're doing, understand the scope of the project, and then I can get a better sense of what level of services I need to provide and what that will cost. But I know that the majority of people that are reaching out to me through the website like that really are just looking for some simpler guidance. And in those cases, I put together some packages that allow me to provide them with a lot of what they need. You know, I can use, for instance, the Cinema Designer software to give somebody a layout consistent with my approach to home theater design, that tells them where to put their speakers, what size screen they need for a given viewing angle. I think we're going to get into some questions kind of related to this type of stuff. And because I'm using a canned software that has the algorithms we all use anyway in it, I can put in the parameters I need to spit out a report and give that to somebody in an hour's time. So I don't have to charge that much money for that. And I can give them a ton of information. What we used to charge $3,000 or $4,000 for, I can do for like $500 now because the amount of time that I have into it is reduced. You know, but I get a lot of people too, who it's like, that's not really what they want. They just want to chat. They don't know what speakers to buy. They don't know what subwoofers are right for their room. They don't know how many they need. They don't know. I've had people call me and they're just like, will acoustics make a difference? What kind of a difference? Like, how am I going to know? Is it worth the money? Those are different conversations. And, you know, my time is valuable. So I'll just be honest. I can't do a lot of those calls for free. So I charge for my time for that kind of a thing. But I've come up with what I think are reasonable rates, and call me and we can have those conversations and I can provide them with I mean, I've had calls with people where like they were expecting all this documentation. We have a 1 hour phone call and they're like, you know what? I got everything I need from that 1 hour. Thanks.
Oh, I see a lot, you know, because I hang around in a lot of the groups. I was trying to find your email. So if anybody wants to reach out to you about anything, the best way to get a hold of you would be just through your email, correct?
Yeah. And I mean, people can call me. My number's on my website too, but I'll just say I think email is the best because it's hard to keep phone calls straight. So if you email me, I have a record of it. I can go back to the conversation. You can send me stuff like pictures of your room, layouts, things like that.
So it was interesting in watching you talk today about the speakers in your room, about why you went like with a hard floor. It didn't matter because of the dispersion of your speakers. So am I right by saying this, that you should decide what speakers you want before you do the acoustic treatments? Because
that's a really good question, actually, because, and there's an interesting irony in this. When we got on before this show tonight, I was on the phone with Anthony Gramani, and I mentioned, hold on, I'm talking to Anthony. I'll be back for a second. He was talking to me specifically about how we need to write an article at some point that explains how a proper home theater, a proper studio, a proper listening room, there's this gestalt aspect of it. It's more than the sum of its parts. It is not just a bunch of good equipment thrown together, and you can't really consider any one of those alone to understand the end result. So when we design rooms, I wouldn't say that we pick the speakers and then design the room, but I would say that we think of them together as a system when we're doing it. So the speaker has to meet certain performance capabilities to make sense in a room, given what the client needs to get out of it. The room needs to be the right room for those speakers. So the thing that was coming up, in case people are wondering, is my room has hard floors. Most people think that's nutso because they're so used to carpeted theaters. Now, there's practical reasons why my room has hard floors, but acoustically, it was something that I could manage for a number of reasons. But I actually don't agree with the idea that a good home theater should have carpeted floors. And my argument for it is that a room only needs to have so much absorption to sound its best. And if you get over that, the room becomes too damped. Now, some people like that, but that's not my acoustic approach. It's not what I like. And so let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you need 300 or 400 square feet of absorption area in a room. What you want to do is spread that out pretty evenly around all the surfaces. But when you've got carpet in a room that's, let's say, like 20 by 15 feet, that's 300 square feet right there of absorption. But it's not very good absorption because carpet is basically equivalent to 3/4 inch, 1 inch absorption. That's it. It means it's very limited bandwidth and it's all stuck in one spot. So even when we're doing carpeted spaces, if we can get away with it, we often will put what I refer to as sort of a reflective ring. So basically the walking paths on the outside of the room are kept hard, wood floor, tile, luxury plank vinyl, whatever you want. And the middle section is carpet. That reduces how much of the floor is absorbative, and then we can do more. We also sometimes put in what I call absorption pits. It's sort of like an area where we go down into the subfloor and open it up so we can have like 2 or 3 inch absorption or 4 inch absorption down there, so that the absorption area is at least more useful. In my room, I bypassed that whole issue by just making the whole floor hard and then putting absorption on the ceiling instead, which gives you a lot of the same effect. But it worked all the better because the speakers were beamforming speakers, have narrow vertical directivity, and there isn't a lot of interaction with the ceiling and floor anyway. So it's a systems approach. Like, we look at all those different variables when we make those decisions.
Okay. Don, have you experienced Matt's room since it's been done? I can't hear you, Don.
Don's muted.
Oh, sorry. Some things about Matt, little details. Yes, I've experienced his room and it's amazing. And I'm going to try to go down there next week again. But like when we were building Gene De La Sala from Audioholics, I kind of designed the hard part of his theater, the walls and the whatnot. And Matt had an idea of turning the platform into a bass trap. And I just thought that was the coolest, effective use of that space. I mean, Matt just has all these creative ideas that a lot of people.
I didn't make up that idea, but thank you.
But you suggested it and designed it.
That's true.
Now, just so everybody knows, because I believe Gene's room is fairly famous. Is this the room with the RBHs?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that was the room.
Yeah, we there's a closet in it that kind of screws it up, but we had to have a closet to put the equipment in and the cables and whatnot. And he didn't have a custom home built, so we kind of limited on what we could do. But Matt had some great suggestions, and actually, Tony Gramani did all the acoustic design in that room for him.
That was actually part of how Anthony and I started working together. Was that he was doing that, and I was helping with the sound ISO, and I think Anthony and I got to know each other also liked each other, wanted to work together, and we found some excuses and made a partnership out of it. It's always good when you can work with your friends, right?
Yeah, no doubt. Hey, if you're having a good time, it's like you're not even working, right? So I got a few questions. If you guys are cool with that, I've had people they emailed in and asked beforehand. We got a few of them. Actually, we chatted about this a little bit before we came on, but there was some more actually too. Obviously, we all hang around, some of the Facebook groups or AVS. For both of you, what is the most common thing, like the common mistake, like people misusing treatments or people not doing any treatments at all? Like I personally, when I notice a lot of rooms, is I don't see a lot of treatments being used, but what's the most common fault that just
wrong kind of treatments, like 2-inch or, cheap stuff they buy on Amazon?
2
like
inches.
those little foam things you're talking about?
Yeah.
I think the biggest issues I see with the treatments would be one of two extremes. Either the room is so undertreated that it just doesn't sound great. And it's like, take a room like Jeans. Jeans is a big room, tall ceilings, hard floors.
25 by 20.
Yeah. And if you don't have any treatment in a room like that, it's going to be very echoey. And then what happens is people complain about poor speech intelligibility and how the sound seems colored and they can't hear the center channel, things like that. And the thing was, if they just treated the room, it would transform it. They would love it. But then you see the other extreme, guys who go on the forums or they call up these acoustics companies. You got to remember, and I'm picking on companies that are like companies I work with, but you call up an acoustics company and say, hey, what do I need for my room? It's in their best interest to sell you as many treatments as possible. So then sometimes the opposite happens. These guys overtreat the room and you get in there and you look at the RT60. I can't tell you how many people have sent me their REW measurements and it shows an RT60 that's well under 0.2 seconds, like 0.15, 0.1. And the thing about that is that from like a speech intelligibility standpoint, it'll be really good. I mean, there's just no getting away from that, but it doesn't sound natural. And I think it doesn't sound as good as a better balanced room. So often in those rooms, and I think there's been some other YouTube videos where people have talked about my silly little tricks, but they work. I'll tell people, why don't you take some cardboard sheets or something reflective, tape it over some of the acoustic treatments in certain locations, just temporarily, see if you like it. If you like it, we're going to change some things in the room. And inevitably, they think I'm nuts. They go and do it, and they come back and they're like, yeah, that sounds a lot better. And we take measurements. The RT60 goes back up. And then what we do is we just modify the treatments in the room. I mean, I had one guy, he had just too much in his room. And a lot of it was he had a ton of this special acoustic foam that had come from one of the kind of popular online sources for acoustic foam. And he had just used the extra foam to cover up all the bare spots on the wall. So what happened basically was he already had like too much absorption to begin with. And then every bare spot got covered with even more of this. So his RT60 was like 0.1 seconds or something like that, really, really low. And I said, just tear it all off. You can put something else up on the wall later. Take a listen. What do you think? So we tore it all off, took a listen, covered up a couple panels with cardboard, like I said, and came back and he's like, that's 1,000,000 times better. So we made some more permanent changes and got it right. I do that a lot. So I would say that it's the extremes. Either the room just isn't treated at all and doesn't sound good. And that's, I think, a worse scenario to be in, or it's just way over treated and it just needs more balance.
I think too, a lot of people get confused because I've been in the hobby my whole life and I have a fairly decent understanding on a lot of stuff, not an expert in anything, but know enough, to have some fun. But I notice a lot of people, they're confused on absorption or, combo panels. Can you quickly maybe just explain the difference between a couple of the popular panels? Because I think there's a lot of confusion there.
So you've got three main categories, and then you've got what I'm going to call subcategories. You've got absorbers, you've got base absorbers, which are specialty absorbers, we'll call them, and you've got diffusers. Something that's used in the pro world, but almost never in home theaters, are redirectors. Redirectors are not designed to diffuse. They're not designed to absorb. They're designed to do what the name calls, redirect the sound somewhere else so you can better control it. Those are used with like studios and things like that, or actually in large performance spaces. So in home theaters, absorbers can fall into multiple categories, full range absorbers. You can have just a plain, like a piece of fuzz on the wall, as Anthony likes to put it. So fiberglass, mineral wool, cotton, foam, whatever. And even though people pick on foam, I got to say, you take a 2-inch slab of foam and a 2-inch slab of fiberglass and you mount it on your wall and you measure the RT60, you're not going to see a huge difference. They both will absorb very well. So then what you can sometimes do is do these combo panels, which put slats on them or some other wooden surface on the front with holes in it. Now, sometimes those are referred to as diffuser absorbers or diffsorbers. They aren't really. If you actually look at what a diffuser has to do in order to be considered a diffuser, which is it needs to essentially mix and randomize the phase at its face, they can't do that. So they're just absorbers. But what they do is they tend to reduce the amount of absorption area for amount of wall area they cover. And they also tune the absorber. So you'll see less high frequency absorption. And often those are both desirable traits. So those are good products to use, but they're not diffusers. Bass traps, I'm treating differently than normal absorbers, even though they are absorbers, because typically good high efficiency bass traps are tuned products. And tuned products basically work by transferring pressure energy to velocity energy and then into heat inside the device. And those are good, although a lot of rooms today with the new DSP systems like ART and waveforming that have come out are lessening the need for that. Not that you can't use them, but they may not be as important. And then you have diffusers. So basically diffusers take the sound that hits it and then breaks it up into smaller energy packets, if you will. They go in all sorts of different random directions where the phase gets, as I said, randomized and mixed. And this provides cues to the ear, your ear, that wall is farther away than it really is. Makes it sound more like you're in a larger space.
Disappear.
Yeah, helps the room kind of disappear. And those, I think, are probably the least used product. They're expensive and confusing.
That was the exact answer I was going to give. I was just glad that you gave that answer. You know,
I heard you. Yeah, I knew you were going to say it.
Yeah, I was going to say that word for word when I answered that guy's question. No, very, very detailed response. I certainly appreciate that. I learned something on that for sure too. Now, the next question is for both of you guys. I had two people ask this question. Understanding that custom calibration is definitely the best. If you had to pick an auto calibration, what are your guys' thoughts on that? If you had to go with an auto calibration,
wipe out. No, I'm kidding.
I like one of the words. Sorry, Yamaha, but it's not a good one. I think both Gene and I feel that Dirac with the bass control is probably the best standard option that's available readily on a number of products. So I would say that's probably one of my first choices. The Trinnov optimizer works well. I will say I don't think its bass optimization is as good as Dirac's. The waveforming is, but that's a different level, of course. Dirac Art would be a next level above Dirac with bass control. Odyssey I have not liked in the past, but they have this new PC software, and I guess we had better, I guess best way to put it is, at least with the Pro Mic kit that we were using, we had much better results using it at Gene's place than I've ever had before. The results were actually quite good. So I think that one could be good. The only caveat is I know it's good when using their $500 Pro setup kit. And we did do a lot of basically manual recalibration to like really fine tune it. So it's hard for me to say like in plug it in and go kind of mode, is it really good enough? Dirac, on the other hand, I've gotten really good results out of Dirac with bass control before. Some of it is getting the subs in the right place, making sure you take the measurements right. That software can be thrown off with bad measurements. But when you do get all that stuff right, it's dialed in systems well enough that I don't know that I could have manually done a significantly better job than it did.
Okay. Don, your thoughts?
I'm a fan of Dirac. Absolutely. Yep. I think the art the Anthem has is pretty good. It's got some attributes to that. But really, I mean, hiring a professional like Matt to come in, or one of the many excellent professionals out there, is the ticket. But if you're going to do a system, I believe Dirac is the best one for sure.
Cool. I guess this question could be for both of you as well too. It's funny, this whole podcast is just going to be questions because everybody was so excited to have you guys on here tonight. They've been messaging me all week.
That's cool.
This person, his name's Pat. He said, I only have one row of seats am I cool with just 2 Atmos speakers, or is it important that I do a front and rear set? Is there going to be any difference? I understand with 2 rows of seats, then 4 would be a given, but with 1 row, is there any benefit with going with 4?
Yeah, I misunderstood that question the first time you asked it to me. So he is misunderstanding, I think, the reason for multiple Atmos speakers. So this is a good topic then. Okay. The number of rows of seats doesn't really dictate to that extent how many ceiling speakers you need, because the number of what you're trying to do, the way to think of it is the way we perceive motion over our head is that the ear needs to be getting sound hitting it at different angles. So that dynamic factor of it hitting the ear. So we have this thing called an HRTF, our head response transfer function. Basically what that is that it changes the way the sound is perceived. So the timbre of that sound is changed at different angles. And the brain has memorized this. It knows this. So it can tell that when those specific changes are taking place, especially when they're happening in this dynamic fashion, that it must be an object going overhead. We actually don't have a very good method for locating sounds overhead. So we use that. And Atmos takes advantage of that. Now, you can trick the brain pretty well with front speakers, rear speakers, and just 1 pair of ceiling speakers. And before Atmos, that was not an unheard of concept. It was even used in research before. And it does work right, especially with the right phase shifts during that. But it's not as good as multiple speakers. So this has nothing to do with number of rows of seats. It's not about coverage. It's about basically taking that separation angle between the ceiling speakers, the front speakers, and the rear speakers, and dividing it up so that that separation angle isn't too great. And then that increases basically our resolving ability of tracking objects as they go overhead. So that doesn't mean we necessarily need like 6 in every room or 8 or 10 or anything like that. There is sort of like a minimum angle that's good enough, if you will. Most rooms up to 20, 25 feet are fine with 4 ceiling speakers, but 4 is always going to be better than 2. 2 works okay, but it's a compromise. In bigger rooms, we do go to more, but I'll be honest, some of that is coverage at that point. Some of that is maintaining a smaller separation angle, and some of it is actually output. So one of the problems we do run into in really large rooms is that we can't, the speakers we're able to bury in the ceiling are just not as high output often as the ones we can put for the LCRs. We still need pretty high output, so we just use more of them in arrays.
So the guy you worked with that does all the mixing, he did the Star Wars movies. I think
Dunn.
You should have at least 4.
4
really take it, 4 to really take advantage of Atmos.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that's where his confusion was, is each row just gets their own Atmos speaker. So if I only have 1 row, do I only need 1 set? But it's more so just like a panning effect as it goes by you to be just more realistic. Is that kind of what I'm getting?
Yeah. I mean, it helps to avoid any sort of like jarring movements, if you will, because even in the lateral angle, so everything that's in front of us that's moving out like this way, you don't want the angles to be too great. So our ability to resolve panning in the front of our head, for instance, is really, really high. We can resolve very small movements in sound. As you get farther out to the sides, we actually lose that ability. So directly to our sides, sounds can move over, like, I forget the exact number now, like 40 or 50 degrees. We can't even tell. And then as it moves behind us, it's not as good as in front, but it improves again. So that's why on the sides, we don't necessarily need to have quite as many speakers. If you look at the Atmos setup, you'll see that in the really, really high channel counts, you end up with 5 in the front, 5 in the back often, at least 4, but often 5 in some of the setups. You can have more than that, actually. And then you'll still only have basically 1 set of side surrounds per row of seats, wides.
At what point do the wides become important? Just when there's too big of a space between your left front and your left surround?
Yes, and I think there's an argument to be made that maybe wides are always a good idea if they're within your budget. I still stand by that there's no such thing as a compromise-free home theater. Whether you're a billionaire with an unlimited budget or you're buying your speakers one at a time after each paycheck, there's always going to be that decision of how much of the resources I'm willing to put towards this theater can I put towards the equipment and each of those buckets, let's say.
Well, front wides are always the hardest to place too.
They can be tricky to place, but what sometimes happens is people try to do really high channel counts and compromise the speakers. The speakers have to be good speakers. I mean, that's just, you can't get away from that.
Even
So if you
the
over,
Atmos surrounds, yeah.
yeah. And so I would rather see somebody do, for instance, a 5.1.2 system with really good speakers than a 11.1.6 system with really mediocre speakers, because that's not going to sound as good. But if budget allows and you've got the right speakers, wides, I think, are beneficial. There is some confusion out there. Now, okay, this is a little tricky. John actually talked to us about this. In theory, Atmos does not limit how those wides are used. Essentially, the objects just have XYZ coordinates attached to them that goes into some metadata on the disk, and the processor figures out what's supposed to go to the wides or not. It's completely unrelated to how the track is actually mixed, because when they mix it, it's only when it gets put into its final form that data gets saved with it.
Well, there's no, didn't he say that there was no recorded discrete data for front wides? And
yeah, they don't, and that's,
yeah.
They did add it recently, but yes, in the past, there was no discrete data for the wides. It was just about how you pan the object, basically, that attaches that XYZ data for it to go to the wides. What that means, though, is that it doesn't matter if the engineer was using wides. The data is there, and it's high bandwidth data to use in the wides. There's a problem, though, which is that certain companies like Disney, for some odd reason, like to take advantage of the fact that you can lock out speakers. So you can make it so even though it should be panning, let's say, 6 ceiling speakers, it's only using 2 of them, locks the others out. And the system can't use those even if it wants to. And the same thing can be done to wides. So for whatever reason, certain Atmos speakers and wides often do get locked out with certain companies. I don't know why that is. We've actually talked to the engineers involved, and what they've told me is that they don't lock it out on their end. It's when they do their mastering, they're not doing that. It's somebody at the disc mastering end that's doing it. Yeah.
Well, that's odd. I don't know what benefit that would have to the end consumer at all.
None. Honestly, I kind of wonder if it's budget.
Oh,
yeah. There's a big discrepancy. There's a lot of differences in the recordings and what you actually get as an end consumer user and what it starts as.
But the core answer to your question is, I think wides are valuable. I would put them in systems always. I don't actually have them in mind, but it was nothing more than the budget thing. I wanted specifically Perlis and S series speakers. I wanted the S7Is in the front. And while they gave me a very generous and good deal, I still had to pay for those. And so I decided to stick with a 7.1.4 system, but I wired for it and I can add the wides later.
well, good. Definitely worth planning ahead, no doubt. And I did 4 Atmos speakers in my room, so even though I had 1 row, so I guess that was a good thing that I did that. I guess this question is, next one's for you, Matt. Somebody brought this a blast from the past. They said they read an article that you wrote, I guess, a while back, and I'm not sure I read this word for word. And this was from John. Matthew has said in the past, for the most part, subwoofers will sound the same as long as they are within their linear range. Can he please explain this further?
I can. I mean, my joke was you shouldn't listen to anything I say, but there is, okay, so there is truth to that, but there's so many caveats that I think it probably needs clarity. So unlike your left, center, and right speakers, subwoofers don't really have like a timbre to them. The timbre of the subwoofer is actually defined by the room itself. That's what dominates how we perceive the sound of a subwoofer. And a subwoofer really is just, in that case, energizing the room, if you will. They're all omnidirectional. I mean, there are some esoteric designs that aren't, but even those esoteric designs that have cardioid patterns and things like that, by the time you get like to the main listening position, they're operating pretty close to the way a omnidirectional low frequency source would, especially at those really low sub 100 hertz frequencies. But forgetting those, let's just take them out of the equation. All sealed imported subwoofers, for the most part, are omni sources, and the room dominates their sound. So what that means is that if the subwoofers are all basically operating within the same bandwidth limits, so we're not talking about a subwoofer that can go down to 10 hertz versus one that can only go down to 40 hertz. I'm talking about bandwidth is the same for these subwoofers. Distortion is the same low level for the subwoofers, and we're within the dynamic limits of them. they should sound the same. There's little things that could affect it. Group delay is one of them, where higher group delay can start to change subtly the sound of the bass. But for the most part, they should all sound the same. And that's been my experience. The issue is that high-end subwoofers that are well engineered tend to have so much higher limits than those low-end subs that often the low-end subs are like, it's not like you can just go out and buy, I'm going to pick on Monoprice, even though they're one of our partners. You can just go out and buy like a really cheap Monoprice sub and just get like 100 of them, and that's going to be good enough, because its limits where it starts to make bad noises or distorts or whatever may be so low that even 100 of them isn't usable. And you're just better off getting, let's say, 4 really good subwoofers. But the core of that is true. All subwoofers will generally sound the same when they're operating within the same limits.
Okay. And obviously, I'm sorry, what's that, Kat? Oh, am I missing some? Sorry. I get one track mind. I feel like I'm just sitting around chatting with you guys, and there's people chatting off to the side. All right, Warren. Hey, brother. Kat was informing your comments been up here for a while, so let me hear you up. Isn't each person's journey really something? It's always interesting how many people's never start off with the intention of working in the AV field, end up there due to shared passion. Oh, yeah. So he was talking about you, Matthew, how you didn't initially start off with this and kind of got into it.
And I'll say on that too, when I was a kid, I wanted to work in this industry, and I did for a bit. I think Don and I, one of our common paths was we were both involved in car audio competition. Yep. Scott, were you as well? I feel like I heard that from somebody.
No, I had a few decent systems, but no, I never competed or anything. No.
So I competed when I was in high school in my first year of college in IDBL and IASCA for sound quality. And I actually did well in IDBL, even though like I'm a big sound quality guy now. Back then, I was just a bass head. And I had won my category for the state and went to nationals twice and things like that. In fact, I think one of the years I would have done a much better in nationals, but I didn't do enough events to have enough total points.
It's funny is we're all in the car audio. Now we're like, I wish I got to turn that shit down.
That's true. Now I'm a cranky old man. But anyway, yeah, I was pretty into that stuff, and I worked in a shop for a little while, and I actually got a bunch of jobs doing installs in like hotels. So I did like the 70 volt systems and things like that for background music. And I did some PA setups for the conference rooms. And that was sort of my start with that. And I wanted to do it for a living. And my dad's like, you can't make any money in AV. You go to college, get a real job. And he kept introducing me to friends who had AV shops that were like going bankrupt. He's like, look, he's got an audiophile shop just like you want. He's going bankrupt. And so I didn't go into the business for a long time, largely because of that. And then later I met people like Don and realized that, there is a business here. On the other hand, I think I'm really lucky. And what I get to do in the AV world, like very few people get to do that. And it's not something you can just be like, I'm going to do that. And so I've had people be like, I like what you do. How do I do that? And I'm like, I don't know. I got really lucky.
Well,
I don't
you've
really
earned the right to be there. I mean, through hard work and studying. It's not for the faint of heart. Everybody, it's like a hobby business. You're like, I love AV. I built a theater. It sounds really good. I'm into it. I'm on the forums. Then you get in there and you got to deal with clients. You're like, oh, maybe I made a mistake.
I think this next question is for both of you. I guess, hey, Brian, thanks for joining, brother. We were talking earlier today. I will just address this to both of you guys. What is your guys' opinion on family room setups?
I mean, they're the majority. I think you can't. I think the worst thing we do in our industry, especially, I'm going to pick on CEDIA. I mean, I'm on like all the committees now, and we talk about this a lot. We pick on ourselves, but it's a real problem. We get snobby sometimes. Like, you need to have these dedicated black pit theaters with constant height screens and the best equipment. And if you don't, you're not a real enthusiast. And the problem is all of that is expensive, including the real estate that takes. I mean, how many people realistically can afford to give up a space that's 15 by 20 or 20 by 30?
Can't. What we do is dictated by designers and builders. I mean, I'll tell you, as an integrator, the overwhelming majority of what I do are architectural speakers or sound bars. And I don't mean a Sonos or the Sonys or Samsungs. I'm talking about a legit LCR sound bar that's really 3 high-end bookshelf speakers kind of put into one unit with a large-scale TV, architectural subs. We're able to get really good sound out of these rooms. most people just that we deal with, I deal with, and of course to an extent Matt, just want good sound, but they don't want to see it. They don't want their wife yelling at them. So there's a lot of amazing products now that allow us to put great sound and picture into a conventional style family room or great room.
Yeah. The other thing I'll mention is that it's a known issue that dedicated home theaters don't typically get enough use because they're one-use spaces. They only really serve one purpose.
Destination locations. Yeah.
Yeah. So the nice thing about family rooms, and I think when you're making decisions, if you're super passionate and you know you're the kind of person who needs a dedicated space, you should do it. I mean, this is how I am. But for a lot of people where they're not sure that's the right thing to do, and maybe they've got varied passions. I mean, I'll just tell you, my wife doesn't like watching movies in my theater. She likes watching them in the family room. My kids claim they like it, but they spend more time on the family room TV. Yeah. I mean, it's often a better use of space for a lot of
most
people.
Most homes have great rooms where the kitchen kind of bleeds into a family room or living room where depending on where you're at, what they call it. And that's where people live. They live in their lanai/kitchen in their family room. And most people use those all the time. Maybe if there's a really cool movie that's coming out. Listen, if you're an enthusiast, you're probably going to be in there because you spent a lot of money and you're into it. But most people live their lives in these rooms, and we're able to deliver, Matt and I both, really exceptional picture and sound that people in the forums and that are into it might poo-poo because they just are uneducated on it. But I mean, I just did a $12,000 LCR soundbar. RBH now makes high output soundbars. We did that. It's some big projects that we've done, Matt. Don't poo-poo it because you can get really good sound, better than you can imagine. Jean's living room sounds amazing.
Well, yeah,
I agree with the use of space.
Yeah, for listens.
And the house that we lived in before, the theater setup was in our living room. We moved into this house. I built a theater in the basement, but sometimes there's 2 or 3 weeks I don't even go down to it. Yeah, I don't even use it.
This is my office. I sit in my office every day, do my work. My theater is the other side of this. It's as simple as walking around. During the week, occasionally, I'll go in and listen to some music or watch a movie, but I would say 90% of what happens in there is like testing stuff, not actually using it for what it's meant for. It's only weekends, and there's definitely weekends that go by where we're just busy and I can't, and we don't watch a movie. So yeah, I have a dedicated space. I mean, I did a video on this once about, if you think about it from the standpoint of like real estate, the value of real estate in this area where I live is pretty high. It's like $600-700 a square foot. So if you take the like value of that, that's a lot of money basically. And
yeah, just sitting there.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it bothers me. It's like, man, you need to use that theater more often.
Yeah, and like Kat just chimed in. She goes, and since we got the RTJs, see, a lot of people, when I bought that setup, they're like, man, that's a lot of money. And I said, well, it was justified because it gets used almost every day because it's in the main living area of the house. And we're a very music-oriented family. We all get into music, so it's always playing in the background. But, yeah, same thing. I mean, the theater is literally 25
theater's
feet
like
away.
A pool table for most people, right? And you end up putting laundry on it. Yeah. I'm telling you, theaters went out of – we were doing multi-million-dollar homes that didn't have theaters for a long time. They're kind of coming back in vogue for consumers because after COVID, people got used to streaming and spending more time. But really, theaters don't get nearly as much use as a family room system in almost all families because, you have to get the kids, you got to get the wife or whoever and bring them into the room. And to me, it should be a place for a special occasion. But I'm telling you, family rooms are where it's at. Or we did a lot of multi-purpose rooms where it had a bar and maybe a pool table or game tables. And we call them media rooms where we could do theater type systems, motorized screens or fixed screens, and put them in these multi-purpose rooms. I mean, hell, my system could power a gigantic theater, but it's in a family room because I'm renting a house right now and I don't have options to do that.
I got to say, with what's available today from companies like Kef and Perlisten, RBH, and numerous other companies for that matter, even RTJ's line of in-wall stuff, you can put together very, very high performance hidden systems. And like, there's a lot of lifestyle acoustic products that have come out. At the end of the day, I could probably transform somebody's living room into, I wouldn't call it like a no compromise, but a very high performance, like the CD levels, level 2, level 3 theater in the family room that could be still a mixed use space
You know,
I mean,
Jeff at RTJ has a LCR soundbar now. It's a big one.
yeah. We can bury it in a wall, like frame around it.
Point
is though that you can have space. I mean, in general, we consider those spaces compromises compared to dedicated theaters, and I think they always probably will be, because who wants to have an all black, for instance, or really dark, windowless family room? But you can do blackout roller shades with those little blackout thingies on the side that keep the light from coming through, and you can do really high performance speakers and big subwoofers, and you can have a screen that rolls up into the ceiling. At the end of it, you can make it a space that actually would perform extremely well.
Or when it transforms, where motorized shades go down, a screen drops, the lights dim, and it kind of transforms from just your typical family room with a TV above a fireplace or whatever to a legit quasi theater. You know, defining the term home theater is something we have to talk about, because it could be something that they advertise at Walmart for $79 home theater in a box, or it could be a theater and a really nice equipment, a family room, or it could be a full tilt theater.
Kat said that's what we got in our other living room. Is exactly what you were just saying, Don.
Yeah, you're just ridiculous. Just so everybody knows, all three of us here actually own the same subwoofers.
Yeah, that's
like,
funny.
exactly the same.
Yeah, except for our theater ones are his living room ones.
Yeah, except for your, ridiculous chamber of boom.
Yeah, it's the pain chamber. I like a little pain once in a while. I got Geotech is asking Matt. He was just curious on why you didn't go with a double bass array in your theater.
I don't know what I was thinking. That's why. So here's the real answer on that one. The original intent was to do subwoofers in 3 of the corners of the room. One of them's got a closet, and use something that's sort of a Getty's Welty-like design approach. It wasn't to do a double bass array. And then literally the room was 2/3 of the way done when they began talking about what waveforming was going to be, and art as well. And I was familiar with these, that they were working on this for a while, but I didn't know what the design requirements were going to be. And art really didn't need that. Waveforming did. My room was already done, and I didn't want to spend the money to have somebody rebuild the wall. But I actually told Don and Scott when we got on that I have to rip out the front of my brand new wall now to put in that the front array. So the answer is I am putting in an array. I will have waveforming in there, and so I will have that done. I have the beta software already. I just don't have the subwoofers in the right location. In the back, based on what we're hearing, it looks like probably where mine are might actually work okay. So I'm going to try that. And if that doesn't work, I may have to rip my rear wall out too. But I'm going to try to avoid that to save some cost and see if I can make this work.
Well, that sounds like an expensive answer.
The never-ending pursuit of perfection.
Yeah.
Warren is asking, it's a business decision too, but yeah.
Yeah. Warren's asking, would a properly filtered and aligned SBA with fast absorption or DBA with through and mini DSP approximate the benefit of trim-knob waveforming of direct art? A planar wave is the goal, correct?
Yes, but it's a little more complicated than that. And basically, one of the things that started coming out when Trinov began releasing information on what waveforming was, those of us who had actually installed these in real systems and more so modeled them in ComSol and looked at how they behave, had noticed that there was a problem, which was that I very rarely, when I have budgets for doing something like an SBA or a DBA, have just one seat. I usually have rows of seats, usually more than 2 for that matter. And when you have a riser and you have all these little perturbations in the wall basically that are changing its shape and angles, every time that planar wave hits that change, it begins to not behave like a planar wave anymore. And you get a bunch of reflections and kind of interactions with itself around the boundary, which is shrinking. And the area where that problem happens gets larger. And so what would happen is essentially it would fall apart by the second row of seats. So you might have pretty good performance at that first row. You might not, because by the time it hits, if the front seats are sitting right up against that riser, the area where the problem is might encompass the front seats too. And so what we were finding was it was a good idea in theory. It worked really well in an empty room with no riser. But the moment you started putting things in the room, it didn't work anymore. Keith Yates actually has been using them, and he's talked about this problem too. They had to basically run sophisticated computer models to figure out the right way of basically delaying the signal to each driver to optimize it so that it wouldn't do that, which is essentially what waveforming is doing. So what I would say is, in theory, yes, in practice, no. You could still do what waveforming is doing to a point, at least manually, but it would be really, really hard to do. The nice thing about waveforming is it basically does it for you very quickly.
Well, that's a very good answer. Oh, we thought YouTube got rid of you for good, Don.
I had a bio break. Sorry.
Now, this seems like a very simple question, but I am assuming that it's not a very simple answer. Brian is asking, what defines a good speaker?
Come on, man.
I mean, that's
like dispersion. We talking output capability. We talking, frequency response, a combination of everything.
All of it.
Yes, it has to be a combination. And so, we can go with we'll call it like the Harman byline on this one. And I think that there actually are a very important source of information of what to look for. We've long understood that a speaker with a very smooth power response, for instance, tends to sound better than a speaker that doesn't have a smooth power response. But we also know that in and of itself was not fully predictive. So then you get into like, what is it that matters? Well, the on-axis flatness seems to matter. So we know people like a speaker that doesn't have a lot of resonances in it. The listening window is sort of a better idea because that takes into account some of the angles around the speaker that fall into the area where we're going to hear. So that needs to be really smooth. I think one of the ones that doesn't get talked about, but it's related to all this, is the smoothness of the directivity index, because that tells us how consistent the response stays as angles change. And so if you were to run like a regression line through the directivity index, the higher the R-squared value of that is, basically, the better the speaker is. And so that's one aspect of it. But the thing is, you could have the best measuring speaker with the best directivity on the market. And there's two things here. One is, you could take two speakers that have equally good performance in that regard. One of them has a half angle that is like 90 degrees, and another speaker has a half angle 120 degrees. They're going to sound completely different in most rooms. So which one is better? I mean, we don't really know. It's sort of a taste thing. There's research that suggests that wider dispersion speaker might be more preferred for music. There's actually research that supports the idea that the narrower dispersion speaker is preferred for movies. And it is better for reducing crosstalk between channels.
Well, the narrow dispersion speakers were all the rage back in the late 90s, early 2000s with the THX speakers.
Yeah, well, they were focused on
they didn't sound very musical.
Yeah, and so that's one aspect of it. But then, like, I like to point out, there's nothing that ruins the experience more than a distorting, overloading speaker. So even if everything is great, if you like put on some loud music or a movie at reference levels and it starts overloading, that's far worse than anything else. That's a far worse problem to have than, problems in the spectral balance, problems in the dispersion, whatever. In terms of bass, I don't personally care about the bass that much. What I actually look for, because of how I design systems, is that
he means bass and speakers, not subwoofer. Oh. She's over here freaking out. He don't like bass?
What? No, I like bass a lot, not in speakers. And the reason is because I use subwoofers. My view is that the speakers are often not in the right location for the optimal placement of subwoofers. And most speakers are using drivers that are just not good at reproducing bass. Like, why not use something that is more dedicated to that purpose? A multi-thousand watt high current amplifier with a driver that's got significant excursion, a big voice coil that can handle the thermal loads really well, etc. That just makes more sense to me than trying to make a full range speaker. Of course, you can do something like Jeff does and stick a subwoofer in the speaker in a modular fashion, and that's sort of the same thing. But the point is, I look for something to be able to get down to 80 hertz. I really don't like ports on those speakers. It adds group delay, noise, and distortion in an area you don't want it. But sometimes it is done because it's the only way to get sufficient output at 80 hertz.
Well, Matt, one of the things that you really helped me understand better, even after being in the business so many years, because you always learn, always, and was the ability for speakers to play very loud and very clean without dynamic compression. They don't change their tonal characteristics. They have good dispersion. But, you enlightened me on, hey, this speaker sounds great with the 1-inch tweeter and a 5 1/4 mid-range and all that, but it's just gonna distort at high volumes, at really high volumes. I mean, it's really hard to make a design with a 1-inch dome tweeter and a smaller mid-range that's going to play, play to the volumes and extremes that you're gonna, the dynamic peaks and valleys that you want in a home theater speaker.
Yeah, I mean, we often look for the system to be able to do, like, a really good high performance system should be able to do about 108 dB at the listening position from each individual speaker with no compression and minimal distortion. That's actually asking a lot. The vast majority of speakers in the market cannot do that in even a modest sized room.
Even a lot of the big towers, fancy audio towers that people have, they're like, oh, these things are rock. But, you've got this 5.5 foot speaker with a 1-inch tweeter. That's going to be the weak point of the chain,
Yeah. I think that kind of just brings us into this next, since we're talking about just capabilities, is John is asking, at what dB and what frequency is a sub considered to be able to do ultra low bass? Is there a certain number, like when you're designing a room, like what is there like a frequency that you shoot for? That, I mean, what's an important frequency to start and work your way up, I guess would be the question.
Well, I mean, we use like the reference SPL levels often as a target. So that's 115 dB in the bass frequencies, and you'd want that down to 20-25 hertz. I mean, I think all of us here like our bass and would like to see even more than that at even lower frequencies. But I would consider a system to be pretty adequate if it can get down to 25 hertz and hit, let's say, 115 or so dB at the listening position. If I'm designing a higher performance system, we widen the bandwidth, we go lower yet, and raise the output. So you might add 6 dB to that to give yourself some headroom and extend it down to, let's say, 15 hertz. If you just really like infrasonics and you also just an extreme bass head, maybe you shoot for another 6 dB and you extend the low end even farther.
Yeah, but that gets expensive real quick.
It's like an exponential increase. I mean, it's you can't. Getting 6 dB more.
I was only able to do what I did at because my room is so small.
Yeah.
If I had a much larger room, then I would need a lot. I was able to hit my numbers. I mean, not easy and not cheap, but if I was going to do that in a room twice my size, it would have been crazy expensive.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm finally at the point of the bass I feel like I need to have and really wanted. And I'm, $24,000 retail in the subwoofers alone and amplification for that. I mean, that's a big pill to swallow.
Yeah. Just when you're talking about one certain frequency range.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the system idea, you need to have dedicated minimum 120 20 amp circuits for each of your sub amps, something like that. Probably on high end designs, as Don knows, because I pushed this with the big project we had, 240. Yeah, 240 30 amp lines are commonly run, or at least 240 20 amp lines are commonly run because you get basically twice the headroom that way.
How many 240s did we run in that one project that we're talking about?
I thought it was 3 or 4.
Yeah, I thought it was 4 of them, and then several dedicated 20s, for the processing and the source and the control system and whatnot. But yeah, you've got to. These amps really respond different when they have enough headroom on the electrical side.
That's why on all the JTR captivators, I did all 220 on all 7 of them. Was to do 220, and I ran all dedicated lines.
Where you can do that.
So
it's a better way to do it. I mean, people tell me all the time that we're nuts, but like, Scott, you're one of the few people that understands this. Like, I went over to Gene's one day and we were screwing around with some RTJ subs on one of his 120, because we just plugged him into like one of the outlets in the room, and it was a 120 20 amp one. We were popping the breaker every 5 minutes. Like,
I remember that. Man.
Yeah.
I hold a big get together every year. We just did it a few months ago. I had like 60 people over here, and in the RTJ setup, of course, a lot of people want to hear those subs on like Bassotronics, like Bass I Love You and stuff. And when I would turn it up to a very spirited level, it would blow the breaker right away. So
it's whenever we design a system for a custom home, we always try to we start off at the foundation, and the foundation is how much power. And you should hear the looks from builders and electricians. You need what? For some speakers?
Well, see, my mistake is we rehabbed this whole house, me and Kat did, when we moved in. But her thing was, she goes, you have the basement theater, do whatever you want. Upstairs, there's going to be no big setup. Well, when she heard the RTJs and wanted them, that room was already redone. So
She heard him and wanted them. I like how you did that.
Yeah. Hey, you
When
got to
she heard
keep
him
her,
and wanted them.
you know, you got to keep her happy. You got to sleep on the couch.
You better marry Cat twice. I'm telling you.
Yes, and my wife, there is no circumstance in the world under which she would go hear those and say, yeah, let's put those in the family room.
Not ever.
Yeah. They came in for demo purposes for a group of people, and they were set up the night before, and she sat and listened to the whole Metallica Black album, and then some Dave Matthews and stuff like that. And then she's like, I think these should stay. And I said, you know how much those cost? She goes, yeah, we won't talk about that again, but I think they should stay. And so that was it.
You know what's cool, man, is I just did a boys trip with my best friend in New Orleans. He's got a duplex that he owns there.
That's why Matthew don't want one of your kidneys.
No, well, yeah. But one of the cool things about New Orleans, I highly recommend you go if you've never been, is the music. And I did a lot of listening to live music and with all types of instruments, and from kids outside playing buckets to inside the jazz bands, and closing my eyes and just trying to listen. Like, man, is my system sound this good? You know what I mean? And especially in the low frequency, the low frequencies are what makes it. That really brings everything together. A really good bass.
And now we were just talking about room sizes, and that this actually just draws in this next question too. So it's working out perfectly. How small of a room is not recommended to do Atmos, and stick with bed layer only?
So it's not a room size limit. You could do an Atmos system in a closet if you wanted to, and it would still function. I would say ceiling height would probably actually be the issue. And I would love to say, well, in the US, or I shouldn't say in the US, in general, this is never an issue because ceilings are always tall. I've actually had some people for projects in certain Asian countries where it's not uncommon to build kind of like bonus rooms with really low ceilings. So I should be careful by saying it's like never an issue. It is an issue sometimes. I would say if your ceiling is like 6 feet or less, you may have to
get away with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the one guy that sent me pictures showed me like the idea was you would sit into the chair into the room. So like you couldn't, and it was actually like a nice room when it was all done, but you couldn't stand up in the room.
I might give Matthew Poes a meltdown here, but I did a stream with Youth Man and Ryan a while back, and it was about speaker placement. And God, people are just crazy about where you put your Atmos speakers, and I think there's a little bit of wiggle room on it.
That's my experience too, including our ears are not all that sensitive to those locations. I think I'll be honest in saying I've never built a room and then like moved the Atmos speakers around and done like blind testing of that. So I'm basing it more on what I understand from psychoacoustics, that we're not that sensitive to those locations. And the fact that I've heard a lot of very good rooms that had less than ideal Atmos.
Well, even in the family room situation that we were talking about earlier, you can't always place Atmos speakers where they need to go. It's a Coffert ceiling, it's a tray ceiling. You got can lights in the way. If you move them 10 degrees out, it's just not going to kill you. And I know so many people on YouTube harp on that, and it kind of upsets me.
And a lot of the people who did the original research on that, where they tested different locations to figure it out, are people I work with. And they've told me stories behind how those locations were chosen. And very little of it had to do with what sounded best.
Yep.
There was definitely a wide range, including certain locations were actually preferred and not chosen.
Wow. Yeah. So don't freak out if you can't do this 15 or whatever degree angle that's going to go on. And you can hear the difference, because I'm not cussing. I guarantee you can't hear the difference. See how good I am?
These questions are all just running right into each other. This is crazy.
Question.
He said, I'm running height. Paul, thanks for joining us, brother. He said, I'm running heights, and my ceiling speakers are just behind my one row of seats. Is this a good setup for Atmos?
I mean, for everybody else, yes. For Paul, I think you're going to have to take those out, cut new holes, patch the old ones, and move them.
Yeah, what are you doing, man?
You can get started on that now. Send progress pics. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's like any hobby. Listen, when you go to a professional like Matthew or myself, and we're designing a room for you, and you're writing really big checks, we try to get it as right as possible. And when you got a dedicated space, it's a lot easier than if you have an existing space, a retro. Really, there's so many factors in it. It's really hard to articulate the things that you can do if you can't put them in ideal positions. I just don't think that it matters as much as it's made out to be.
Yeah. I was having a conversation one day with Peter Eilette, who's, I think, one of the top designers. You know, Anthony and Grimani's, who I work with, is definitely one of the top designers. We've had the same conversation, but Peter made a specific comment that he articulated it better with his nice British accent than I do. But what he basically said was the best home theaters, really what separates, you know, good engineers, good home theater designers from bad ones, is the quality of compromises that they're making. So basically the best home theaters are nothing more than a series of very well thought out compromises. We never have to do everything exactly the way it needs to be. And yet we still produce very high performance systems.
Yeah. So, and it's weird to think that even people with $1 million rooms are still making compromises.
Yeah, everything's a compromise.
Yeah. I've worked on systems that I'm pretty sure the equipment is in the $2 to $3 million range. The room cost, if you include the cost of like the flooring, the fabrics, the chairs, all that stuff, probably $5-6 million. And there's still a ton of compromises. In fact, more than many enthusiast theaters would have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's some enthusiasts out there doing some great work. I'm not saying only the pros can do it. I've seen some DIY guys do some killer systems. I mean, you have too, Matt. I mean, well thought out, well laid out, well designed systems.
Mike is asking, hey Matthew, I recently saw someone on their channel recommend to split the center channel signal and run a vertical speaker on each side of the screen, depending on the separation between the mains. That makes sense to you? And I mean, is there any benefit?
No, I don't know. I don't know why they'd be recommending that. That would introduce group delay. Yeah, that would be a compromise I would consider not worth making. So, you know, one of the problems you run into with putting a center channel with a direct view display rather than like a screen where it's acoustically transparent, you can put the best thing is always going to be placing the speakers where they're supposed to be, which is going to have to be them behind an acoustically transparent screen. But if you can't do that, then you have to make, again, well thought out compromises. So what we often do is we create a low profile speaker that can go above or below the screen, often below, because what we try to do is often get the tweeter height roughly at the bottom, between the bottom and the 1/3 point, or the 1/3 point and the halfway point of the screen, kind of somewhere in that general range. And so that to keep the distance between the left and the right speaker in the center lesser, the bottom ends up being a better location. But both could work, top or bottom. And what this person is saying is, well, your screen is way too small, basically. So the other thing I should mention is the correct placement of the left and the right speaker is supposed to be the same as the viewing angle. So if your screen is so small that your viewing angle allows your center speaker to be on either side of the screen, and then your left and the right are much farther out, that's already a big compromise. It means your viewing angle is not consistent with proper home cinema design, which is normal with direct view TVs in living rooms, but it is a compromise, a pretty big one, actually. So then putting the speakers there like that, what's going to happen is that the way they combine together is going to create all this comb filtering that's going to affect the timbre of the speaker pretty dramatically. And it's the same kind of problem that arises out of, for instance, the natural center image that's created out of a left and a right speaker, creating a phantom center, because that also has comb filtering, but kind of worse. I actually think that in that scenario, you'd be better off just not having a center if you really want to do
like a phantom center or something.
A phantom center, yeah, that would probably work better than that approach. But
although there's a lot of new products and research and processing that are being worked on now because micro LEDs are going to be the future. I'm not saying they're going to replace projectors, but as the price points come down, they just have a lot of advantages on the video side. And I know Matt and I and several people are working on ideas to do that, whether it be some kind of sound bar angled up,
that's your idea.
Huh?
That's your idea.
My idea rocks, dude. Whatever.
So the hottest areas of research in terms of like what we would do for speakers for micro LED say largely pertain to reflecting off the screen. That approach can work really well, but it's really tricky to get right.
The
And when you
Meyer
don't get
sound.
it right, it's Meyer, Anthony has his own system and we've played with it a lot. There's others. Harman also did a reflectance system for theirs.
Yeah, but they do where they had speakers on the side that kind of
but it's still reflecting. The ones on the side are reflecting off the screen towards you to create that image. So, I mean, that's kind of the hottest area. The next one that's been done would be things like just aiming the speaker up or down, having it just above the screen or just below it, adding multiple speakers. I think another approach that could work, but we've found it not to work more often than it does, is putting a center channel above and below the screen. That's another not uncommon approach. There are tricks you can do to get rid of the comb filtering, and that you can do things like what's called a darkening filter on the upper speaker that's above the screen to like make it sound better. What I'll tell you is every single one of those is a compromise. And to a point that I'm not sold yet that micro LED can be turned into a home theater as good as a really good projector with an acoustically transparent screen. It's a challenge, though, as Don knows, that like I want to take on. This is one of those things where I've been doing a bunch of work to try to find a solution. I mean, I've worked with some of the top guys who do micro LEDs, and they have all said the same thing to me. There's no good solution right now. We're still
nobody's really nailed it.
Yeah. So we need to work on that. So this
what about
particular
Sony's
question,
processing, Matt, on their dual center, the Sony processing on their new ES receiver?
Well, it turned out not to be as fancy as I thought. So I don't know that that's quite there either.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's not shoot Warren Wilson, guys, because he asked us not to. But why wouldn't Infinite Baffle be a candidate for a high SPL leveraging less investment in amplification?
I mean, I think there's actually more myth than reality around Infinite Baffle subwoofers, and that's sort of the problem there. They're not necessarily substantially more efficient. They don't necessarily produce a lot more really deep bass. And then for a lot of people, the problem just becomes where are you going to stick them?
The physical installation, the limitations physically of Infinite Baffle are very, very difficult. And I've heard some Infinite Baffle systems in the past and never really found them to be super accurate. I mean, just the ones I heard.
Yeah. One of the problems is they do need special drivers because they're not getting any sort of damping. The air spring that you get in a sealed box is missing basically. Mm-hmm. So you have to have a very special driver to do that. They can, if you get the right driver and you're willing to dedicate the space to it, and you can, I mean, the other thing too is I almost always am doing sound isolated theaters. How the heck do you do a sound isolated theater with an Infinite Baffle subwoofer?
You don't. They're very challenging.
Okay. Well, that's certainly a good answer, Warren. So that's this next question, which I think gets asked every other day on a group or a forum somewhere, and I'm sure you guys have both heard this question a lot, and I think it deserves a good answer. But should all speakers be by the same manufacturer or brand, timbre? I mean, my thought, and you guys can elaborate on it, is I've always said at least try to make sure all your bed layers are the same, like the same tweeter and stuff. The Atmos, you can do something different if it's not available or too expensive to. But what's your guys' thought?
Yeah, well, first gotta give you a hard time. It's timbre.
Oh man, I didn't even graduate high school. Give me a break.
Don't you know? Okay, all right.
First of all, I'm selling acoustics. I'm selling acoustics over here.
Did you say Massachusetts?
Massachusetts.
For me?
So to answer that, I think the best systems have basically identical speakers in every channel. That's always ideal, but that's not practical for a lot of people. My system doesn't have an identical speaker. I have a different surround speaker than the LCRs for cost reasons. But like in my case, they are identical drivers, and the tweeter section down to 1 kilohertz is identical even in the crossover. I think if you can maintain basically identical timbre, the spectral balance, the directivity down to 1 kilohertz, you're going to find it to be really good. If it starts to vary a little bit below that, as long as the overall spectral balance remains the same, some differences in directivity and output and things like that are probably not important, and it's going to sound good. For the Atmos stuff, here's what I'll say. In theory, you really do want timbre match because they are full range channels. in practice, they don't seem to be putting stuff up there that makes that all that big a deal, except for music. So for music, they're using those just like any other channel. So it would be better if you're doing a lot of surround music to have fully timbre match system with all identical speakers.
Those per listen and ceiling.
Yeah, you could in theory. Yeah, well, I want to put those in as soon as I
know
can
you do.
justify it. In theory, you could probably take a speaker that isn't the same brand and drivers and make it a good match to others. And I know people who do that. In practice, I think that's pretty hard to do. I think most enthusiasts would just find it much easier to make sure they're buying all match speakers.
Okay. I've this is actually the second question I've seen that came up about this. So you guys both have pictures of your setups you've done. I've shared the last time Don was on a couple of months ago. We shared some pictures of setups he's done. Matthew, if people do you have like a gallery?
NDAs, brother.
Yeah. So I wanted to actually talk about this because it comes up sometimes, and I think people don't fully understand how the industry we work in works. So yes, I have pictures. I can't share most of them. And the reason I think should be understood by people, I think sometimes people think that we're hiding something. Half my projects right now have NDAs with the client representatives. I actually have never met those clients, and I don't know who they are. I just work through their reps. That's who these people are.
A lot of famous or really wealthy people have handlers and managers, and they're very private. So listen, you talk about frustrating, and Matt can back me up on this. We do these amazing systems that really have our blood, sweat, and heart all over them for, in some cases, 1 or 2 years of design and implementation going into them, but we can't share them. We've got some stuff that's going to be on TV that once that hits, we'll be able to share, but a lot of them are just very private, as you can understand, and we just can't share it.
And I haven't been doing this long enough to have built up. And like, basically, if you talk to anybody who's in this industry who works at this level, they'll tell you that it's probably 1 out of 20 or 1 out of 30 projects that you get that you can share.
Yep.
I just haven't been working in this industry at this level long enough to have done enough of those projects to have more than 1 or 2 of them that I can share. I have lots of little projects, but they're just not as cool to share.
Yeah. So we always talk to our clients at the beginning of it about that particular reason. And we've got a couple of them, like the one house in Tampa, Matt, we're going to be able to share that here soon. We finally got permission to do that. It's like the 3rd or 4th largest house in America. It's stunning beyond words. I could sit here for 20 minutes trying to describe these houses to you and what we're doing. But believe me, nobody wants to, because it's your work, it's your baby. When you want to put up pictures of your kid on Facebook, we do too, but we have to be professionals, and we're bound legally on a lot of these things, as you can imagine. So please bear with us on that.
Yeah, I was able to share a few of your pictures last time, Don. Just
those are all cool and open. And we have a lot of awards in our industry that we seek out to win because they give affirmation of what your work is from industry professionals. There's no better affirmation than winning an awards that were picked from fellow integrators and designers that go into it. Matt's integrated himself. He went to CEDIA this year and was kind of the belle of the ball. I mean, you really were. Everybody was talking about you and wanted to meet you and do that. So Matt's kind of becoming instrumental on setting the protocols and parameters for other integrators all across the world to do when they design theaters. And I think that's really cool. Hats off to you, brother, on that one.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. So we're pushing about 1.5 hours. We'll take a few more questions because I don't want to tie everybody up for the whole evening. James, thanks for joining us, man. I see your question's been sitting in there for a while. Would room size matter when it comes to ceiling or wall mounted heights?
I mean, if you look at, yes, but not in the way people think. So if you look at the angles that Dolby specifies for the Atmos speakers, the smaller the room, the closer those speakers are together, not the farther apart. So it'd actually be really large rooms with really, really high ceilings where you'd end up probably seeing them on the wall. It's basically the proportions, I guess, if you think about it, the length versus width versus height. If you've got like a shaft of a room, the speakers could end up on the walls instead of the ceiling to be at the right angles. Otherwise, wall mounting Atmos speakers is just a compromise. That's because for some people it's easier to do that. Like, especially sometimes in apartments or commercial style construction, you've got concrete span ceilings. You can't even run wire in those. So what do you do?
They don't sound as good. I mean, the wall mounted ones don't. Remember, you didn't go to that Audio Vice show where they had a bunch of the Atmos speakers angled on like 10-foot poles coming into it. Ceiling mounting is definitely the way to go if you can do it.
Mike is asking Matt. Matt, you reviewed the Polk Legend 800s. How far from a sidewall should they be, and what are your thoughts on using them in a combo home theater / music setup?
They work best when they're pretty far from the sidewalls because the way the crosstalk cancellation works really needs to minimize reflections. So probably ideally 2 meters plus from each sidewall. So like 6.5, 7 feet at least. That's often not possible. They still work pretty well. What you can do is add a lot of absorption to the sidewall near the speaker if you have to put them in there. In terms of use in a home theater music room, they don't play as loud as other speakers of their size that are more designed for home theater use, but they do play pretty loud for most people's standard. I wouldn't use them in a big room, but in a modest size room, they'll play probably plenty loud. And I thought they sounded actually surprisingly good for what they were, and could work well.
Mike, if you read that review, that's one of the better reviews of any speaker ever put out. I gotta give you kudos on that one, Matt. It was Tolstoy long, you know what I mean? It's a little War and Peace, but it was an amazing review. Like, good job.
Yeah, I've experienced those on 2 different occasions. I think they sound really good. You know,
they do.
With the right content, the SDA technology actually allows them to image in ways that are pretty unreal, and it put me on a kind of collision path with other better approaches to doing that I wouldn't have gotten into. I would have thought are kind of gimmicky, and like the Bach 3D software, for instance, that uses digital crosstalk cancellation.
Are either of you guys familiar, not to put you on the spot, but with RSL MK2 in ceilings?
I know what they are. I don't. It goes back to the thing we talked about before. What you want for your Atmos speakers needs to be a good timbre match to the rest of the speakers. If you're using RSLs and they happen to sound close, great. If not, they could be good. It may not be enough of a match to keep things cohesive.
Now, I believe Brian is using Triad silvers on all his channels, on all his bed layers. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with them.
Yeah, I'm a Triad dealer. Triad makes some really amazing in-ceiling angled speakers that have multiple drivers and are high output. I mean, you know, Triad's been in this game a long time, and if you could keep an all silver system from your bed layers to your object-based surrounds and whatnot, that's not a bad setup.
So maybe that would be his better option, is just
the Triad makes they're kind of a aluminum housing, and they have like 2 5 1/4 and a 1-inch tweeter, and they kind of angle, and they're pretty big and they're square, but if you can get those in, those are actually really good.
We got another sub. I get a lot of subwoofer questions on my podcast. I don't know why.
I wonder.
Brian, I actually talked to Brian earlier today too. I'm really having trouble placing my subwoofers in my room. I can only use one corner in my room, and my seats are about 1/3 into my room. Do you have any recommendations on where to place them? He didn't say how many, so I guess
I was thinking the same thing. I mean, if you've got, let's just say you have 4 subwoofers, but only one corner you can use, then use whatever other locations you have. If you've got like a midpoint on a sidewall, just try to keep the separation of them to be as much as possible, because that increases the spatial variation. From there, there's tricks you can do with DSP that allow those subwoofers to better handle the modes and give you a flatter response. I mean, if you don't have any other way to do it, MSO, for instance, is a pretty good piece of software that can get you to a point of having a pretty smooth response. A lot of the things that I do are pretty similar to what's being done in that software. A lot of what Harman does, for instance, in sound field management is relatively similar. And so, you can do a lot with that basically. And then with art and waveforming, we're kind of moving into a new, better yet approach. Art, especially for a situation like that one, where again, just keep those subwoofers as far apart as possible. Let art do its thing, and you'll have really good results.
All right.
4 subwoofers is where it's at if you can do it. 4
20
subs spread across the room.
where it's at.
What's that?
24 subwoofers is where it's at.
Now we're talking.
Okay, Jeffrey.
That's for the late night show. Now we're talking.
4 minimum. 4 is the stepping stone, the beginning into it, because it, I've got 6 in my main system, and adding the 4 main big subs to it was really a game changer.
Now, I believe that John's asking a question that I see a lot of times too. People, I guess what I see a lot is, we all know that keeping the speakers the same is important. How do you guys feel about the amplification?
I mean, it goes without saying, if you're going to put a system in, if you can have consistency in the speakers themselves and the amplification driving, that's always ideal. I know we can't always do that, but if you can do that, that's ideal.
I think I have like 7 different brands of amplifiers in my system.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. If the first off, subwoofers can have whatever amplifier is optimal for them. So that is an unimportant one. For the rest of the speakers, it's really more if like the amp actually sounds different, then it's broken. Like there's no reason for any reasonable modern amplifier to sound different from brand to brand. Really what it's going to be about are going to be things like max output before clipping. So what could happen would be, let's just say you have like a different amplifier for your center channel and your left and right speakers, and you've got an extra 3 or 4 dB of output on the left and the right versus center channel. That could put you in a situation where you could have some problems with compression on the center channel. So at least keeping like the heavy duty speakers, like the left, center, and right on a common amplifier, or at least same brand, is a good idea. For the surround, same thing. Like I wouldn't want to have like the left surround have 25 watts and the right surround have 100 watts, because you might start to hit the limits of one of them. The only other issue that comes up would be sensitivity. So different amplifiers have different input gains. There is sort of an industry standard. It's way too high actually, but it allows cheap receivers to be able to drive them to clipping. And if you do have different brands with different sensitivity levels, I mean, the auto setups actually do a decent job of level matching and compensating for that. But if you're doing it manually, you just have to know that and account for it, because the lower sensitivity amp is going to have a lower SPL level for a given input.
Well, Matt, you hooked me up with that Stark Sound amp, which I use around my Atmos, and I have this big, powerful Pascal-driven RBH amp for my bass layers, and it works great with it. I really can't.
Yeah, no issues with stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, I promised that I would only keep you on here for about an hour and a half, and I always run a few minutes over. I believe that we've covered a lot of the questions at hand, but there is just, if Matt, because this is what you specialize in, and obviously we all work on budgets, some not very much of a budget, some a lot, but if do you have any tips or tricks or cheap acoustic like hacks for people that just don't have anything like? And the reason I'm bringing this up is when I first did my room, I had barely any treatments at all. So I covered my back wall in 4 inches of safe and sound, and then I covered it with black cloth, and that really made my speech more intelligible for my center channel. Is there just something that you're like if I was just starting with some kind of acoustic treatment, like what is the one, if I was going to take it in steps, what would be the very first, if I only had a few $100s to work with, where am I putting that few $100s?
Yeah, I think if I only had a few $100s to work with, I would try to go the DIY route, because your money's going to go farther. Make your own acoustic panels. Buy some, I mean, like I said before, absorption is absorption. It doesn't really matter. Foam actually is quite expensive. Like people always refer to as cheap. Go try to buy a 4-inch thick 2x4 slab of foam and see how that compares with a piece of fiberglass. It's actually very expensive. So mineral wool, fiberglass, cotton, whatever you want to use, go find some material. There's a lot of options that are good. And then get like a box of slabs of that, maybe enough to cover roughly 10% of your wall area, and then cover it in fabric. Make a wood frame if you want. If you don't want, I mean, probably there's a way to hang it without the wood frame too. And if you're really on a tight budget and you don't care what it looks like, you could do that. You do want to cover it in fabric, though. I wouldn't leave fiberglass or mineral wool exposed in a room. And try to cover it in a way where you're kind of evenly covering it. So don't try to hit like the first reflection points or anything like that. Just try to spread it out more evenly around the room. Because remember, here's the thing that gets goofy with their first reflection points idea, for instance. Which speaker's first reflection point? You're going to have 5, 7, 9 plus channels in the room. They've all got different first reflection points. The best thing to do to optimize that room is going to be to spread that out. And then once you've got about 10% of the wall area covered with absorption, you really do want some diffusion in there too. And there are cheap options out there. I mean, they're not great, but there's a lot of really cheap ones on like Amazon and stuff that are coming out of China. They'll get the job done. They're not going to work as good as a proper diffuser, but they're better than nothing. And there are some designs that are being sold there that are not diffusers, and I probably wouldn't use those. And there's some that are. They're just not very optimal. But again, you can use them. So that's kind of the route I think I would take.
Okay. And I do have one more question that was emailed to me, and I don't know if this falls in your area of expertise, Matt, or maybe even Don has some input on this. Due to the cost of Kaleidoscape, this is from Steve. He is curious, do either one of you guys believe that streaming services, internet, anytime in the near future will be given us at like disc quality through a streaming service? No. I have a friend that works for NetStream, a Netflix streaming services, and it's just a bandwidth issue. Until we got a major change in the bandwidth and the processing of our internet. Yeah. I think streaming is really good. I mean, if you watch a quality service like Netflix or Amazon or Disney, we use it for stuff. Yeah. But not if I like any new action movie or anything like that. I'm buying on disc and using in the theater.
You have been buying a disc, but you're not going to be able to do that in the near future.
Yeah, there's a lot of differences between the content being mastered for streaming and what you can get on a disc that's core to the content itself. It's not even just the bandwidth and compression. They're actually doing things to it that make it different. I actually was recently talking to the guys at HD Fury about this. So as an example, I don't know why, but the HD10 version of the Disney Plus content is very compromised compared to the Dolby Vision version. But if you take that exact same content, you buy a Dolby Vision disc and you do the same thing, you force the player to output HD10 versus Dolby Vision, there's almost no difference. So I don't know why they're doing that. It's kind of like locking the Atmos speakers out. They seem to be compromising it, but in many cases, the discs are just a lot better right now. What Kaleidoscape is producing looks a lot better too. And it doesn't seem like we're that close. It seems like what they're trying to do is continue to make small incremental improvements while reducing how much bandwidth they're using. They're not looking at it as, well, internet's getting faster. Let's just start to raise the amount of, raise the bit rate, for instance. The sound is even compromised still. It's not even close to what you get on a disc.
You have to understand one thing. The overwhelming majority of people that have any kind of audio system are sound bars and maybe a sub and maybe rears. We're a small pocket of what that. So they try to design these systems with that in mind. You really got to understand that.
Yeah, definitely. Because we're the 1% for sure.
I'd just like to say too, if you are putting together a system, you have a system, you're upgrading a system. And I've got no skin in this. I'm just saying this, bringing Matt in and having a conversation with him and letting him do his magic on it. It's going to cost because, the man has earned the right to do that. But bringing him in and letting him work with you, you're getting the same kind of quality that people that are doing multi-million dollar theaters are doing. And he can make a big, substantial difference in the enjoyment of the sound that you get from your system. I assure you, I've seen him do it multiple times.
Yeah. I actually got a testimonial sent to me by one of the clients. I thought it was really nice. He bought new speakers. So he had Martin Logans, he bought Perlisons, and he treated the room. He did like a whole lot of things at once, but he kept the Martin Logans in the room and he was listening to it and he wrote the testimonial and it basically said, Matt's acoustic treatment design ended up making a bigger difference in the speakers. I mean, he went from a pair of kind of average quality, let's say
Oceans.
$4,000 or $5,000 a pair of speakers to like $20,000 a pair of speakers. And it was my acoustic treatment that made the biggest difference.
Huge deal. And I know nobody wants to spend the money on the design part because it's not, bless you, the design part because it's not sexy. But believe me, I've seen that work. It's amazing.
We recommend that you consider spending about 5 to 10% of your system's budget on the design side of things. And we've had some people balk at that. But the reality is, if you look at something like building a house, it's not uncommon for 20% of a custom home's budget to go to architecture and another 10% to go to interior design.
Interior design, yeah.
So if you think about it, I'm kind of acting as your interior designer and architect and engineer. To ask for 5 or 10% of your budget to do that work is pretty reasonable.
It's totally reasonable. And I can't emphasize enough the difference that it makes. Even if you have to lower your budget a little bit in some of your equipment, getting the room right will make up for that tenfold.
Yeah, definitely the room will dictate how everything sounds, and the treatments will dictate how everything sounds. I mean, we've all experienced that firsthand, I think. That's the thing I get, like when people come in my room, if they're in an untreated room, they're like, everything sounds so clean and it's very easy to understand what's going on. And, and yeah, I mean, that's the benefit of, my room's not, I just kind of took an empty area of our basement and turned it into a room and did some treatments and stuff. So if you take it even a step further and you do a purpose-built room, I mean, then it's even better than that, obviously.
Oh yeah. I mean, when you deal with Matt, he cares because he loves it. He really, truly wants you to have the best performance and sound that you can. And he's knowledgeable on speaker designs, the measurements, the components, the amplification, the power. And another thing people never think about, HVAC. That's a huge deal. You ever been watching a movie and your air conditioner kicks on in a quiet place?
Yeah, mine does all the time.
Not so quiet anymore.
Yeah.
Matt he'll put diffusers in with muffler. I mean, I'm telling you.
Air diffusers, not sound diffusers. Yeah, actually, one of my big pet peeves is I don't know where it came from, but people seem to love to do these basement theaters and then stick split, one of those mini splits in there.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is, like, they're like, oh yeah, they're great, they're really quiet, and it's like, come on, it's like 10 dB louder than your projector, and it basically makes the same sound as the projector. So the two are going to largely combine in phase. You're getting like significant noise floor from that. And there's other options that, if you're willing to spend a little bit more money and put a little bit more effort into the design side, will make the room much more comfortable and quieter. I like mini splits. Okay. I'm not a huge fan of ductless mini splits.
And the cooling. I mean, how many theater rooms you've been in that were just furnaces? They get really hot.
Yeah. Or the opposite. We actually designed the HVAC when we designed theaters, and we put a lot of engineering into it. I actually work with the mechanical side of the contractor quite a bit, and like they learn from us, which surprises me because it's not our area of expertise, but we've had to learn it as part of our design and engineering work. And so we'll sit there and say, well, yeah, we need 6 turnovers an hour in this room, so we need the duct size to be 18 inches in diameter. We're going to put in 2 inches of duct liner. We're going to throw in this IAC muffler over here. It needs to be 2 meters long. And they're just looking at us like, no one does this. And it's like, you do.
Or sound transmission. You're trying to do sound mitigation in a room, and then it's all going through the ductwork to the other rooms.
I actually have a project that we had to put on ice for a little while to re-engineer because they never told us that there was a common plenum return. So what that means is that the ceiling, if you go up past the drywall, the whole area there is used as a return, and you basically just cut a hole in the ceiling, put a little vent on it, and that's your return. And this was supposed to be a sound isolated theater, so it's got like STC 65 rated walls. The ceiling in theory would have been, except for there was giant returns cut into it that would have going to basically allow the sound to transfer to every room all around it. I look up, I'm like, why didn't you tell us that?
Well,
yeah. So there's a lot of factors that people, even in the forums and different groups, they don't talk about because they just don't know, because they've done one theater. They and they've done a lot of smart choices, but they didn't finish it properly.
Yeah, it was and we'll be wrapping this up in a second. But when Youthman came to Chicago and did a couple room tours, there's actually somebody living in an apartment building with a big JTR setup with a bunch of subs and towers and that. And he had a company come in and build a room within a room. He goes, I can do whatever I want in here. I don't bother none of my neighbors. I mean, and to me, that was just unbelievably awesome.
That costs a lot of money, though.
Yeah. He said it was very expensive.
Yeah, I mean, well over 100,000 is kind of the typical to take a space and turn it into a sound isolated space. That's just tearing the drywall down and putting back up a sound isolated version of that, basically. So it is expensive, but
it's like a room, just basic. It's a room within a room, pretty much, right? Kind of, is that?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, we don't build rooms that are like literally a room built inside of another room. What we do is simply decouple all the walls, but effectively it's the same thing. So we often will do, like, my room is dual stud for all the partition walls. So you might say that that's a room within a room, but I don't really see it that way. I mean, none of the walls, for instance, are connected to each other. My floor is completely decoupled from all the walls and it floats on springs. All the walls are decoupled from each other, but there is like an inner shell that's physically separated from and decoupled from the outer shell. In some space constrained areas, we will actually not use a double stud. There isn't like an air gap between the inner wall and the outer wall, but there is a spring isolator between them of some kind. And that's still the same concept. And yeah, we can achieve really high STC levels. We can make it. I can't make it so you can't hear anything, but I can make it so it won't really bother any normal person.
Matt's got some really cost-effective solutions for that too. Very more so than I've ever seen.
Cost effective for what it is.
Well, I mean, for what it is.
Yeah.
So, and then of course, if people have any other questions or they want to, they're interested in these kind of services, the best way to get a hold of Matt, he said you can call him, but just easier pipe, trail for everybody to kind of keep it in order would be to just email them.
Yeah. If any of your viewers have called me, they probably hear me always say, yeah, I can do that. Can you please email me? It's just so much easier to handle these kinds of conversations that way. I know you guys want to talk to me, but we'll have our calls. It's just the email is the best way to keep track of what we're doing.
Yeah, he's a busy boy.
All right, cool, guys. Thanks for joining me. It's an honor to have you both on here. I certainly appreciate your time. And I'm going to throw you guys in the waiting room, and I'll hop back on with you guys in a second.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Everybody says thanks, man. Everybody appreciates you guys coming on.
Pleasure.
All right, everybody. There you have it. I said about an hour and a half, and as you know me, I always go over. Hopefully you guys enjoyed yourself. If you've been enjoying the content and all the episodes, please hit like, subscribe. It certainly helps us out here on the channel. If you're not part of our Facebook group, we just have some additional stuff going on there. We try to keep in contact with everybody as much as we can. Everybody's got crazy busy lives going on, but you're more than welcome to come join us on the Scott Cat Facebook group. Next Wednesday, Kat and I will be on to do our giveaway because we reached 1,000 subscribers. Woo! Yeah, I think we're up to 1,100 or just over 1,100 now. All because you guys are wonderful subscribers, our Patreons, all you guys sharing our content. We certainly appreciate it. Next Friday night is my holiday special for Friday Night AV, special time, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. Myself, Michael Stevens, Youthman, Tony from JTR, Mark Giovanetti, and Nick should be joining us as well, too, that does projector calibrations. So us five are going to hop on here for an hour or two and just hang out with everybody right before the holidays. So, and then I am going to be closing up this year with Chris Seymour, and we're going to just dive into screens and what size you need, what kind you need. And yeah, everybody, I hope you have a great weekend, and certainly appreciate the love and support. We tried to get back to all the questions and comments. And yeah, email us, keep in touch, everybody, and we will see you Wednesday night. Say good night, Catherine.
Good night.
All right, guys, we are out of here. Peace out.